Late at night, in a quiet laboratory, a young physicist stood alone in front of a small glowing screen. The building was almost empty, the air was still, and the only sound was the soft hum of machines. On the table in front of him sat a simple device, two narrow slits cut into a thin barrier, and a source that fired tiny particles toward it. It was an old experiment, first done with light more than 200 years ago, repeated so many times that most scientists no longer felt surprised by it. But tonight, something about it felt different. The physicist pressed a button, and electrons began to fire one by one toward the slits. Behind the barrier was a screen that would show where each electron landed. If electrons were small, solid particles, like tiny bullets, they should pass through one slit or the other, and form two clear lines on the screen. That was the logical result. But that was not what happened. Instead, a strange pattern slowly appeared. Soft bands of light and dark, spreading out like ripples on water. It was a wave pattern, as if each electron had passed through both slits at the same time, interfering with itself. The physicist stared at the screen. Even though he had seen this before, it still felt impossible. How could a single particle act like a wave? How could it be in two places at once? He leaned closer and activated a detector near the slits. The detector's job was simple. It would watch which slit the electron passed through. Nothing else would change. The machine was the same. The room was the same. The electrons were the same. Only one thing was different. Now, the path of the electron was being observed. He pressed the button again. One by one, the electrons fired toward the barrier. This time, the pattern on the screen began to change. The soft wave bands disappeared in their place. Two simple lines formed, exactly what you would expect from tiny solid particles. The physicist slowly stepped back. The electrons were no longer behaving like waves. They were acting like particles, as if they somehow knew they were being watched. He turned off the detector. Again, he fired the electrons. The wave pattern returned. He turned the detector back on. The wave pattern vanished, replaced by two lines. On, wave, off, particle. Nothing else in the experiment changed. Only the act of observation. The room suddenly felt smaller, because this was not just a technical detail. In science, observation is supposed to reveal reality, not create it. A thermometer does not change the weather. A ruler does not change the length of a table. Watching something should not change what it is, and yet, at the smallest level of the universe, that seemed to be exactly what was happening. The physicist looked at the screen again, but this time, the question was no longer about electrons. It was about reality itself, before measurement. The electron behaved like a wave of many possibilities. After measurement, it became one clear outcome. As if the universe waited for a question before giving an answer. He felt a strange thought enter his mind. What if this was not just about particles? What if reality, at its core, was not fully decided until it was observed? What if the act of looking was not passive, but active? He imagined the world outside the lab. Cities, oceans, people making choices. How many possibilities existed in every moment? How many futures were like waves, spreading out unseen? And what, exactly, caused one path to become real? Was it measurement? Was it interaction? Or was it something deeper? Something connected to awareness itself? The machine continued to hum softly. The electrons continued to change their behavior, depending on whether they were observed. And in that quiet lab, one unsettling idea began to grow. Maybe human beings are not just standing outside reality, watching it unfold. Maybe they are part of the experiment. Maybe the moment you stop being only an observer is the moment you realize you have been shaping the pattern all along. And if that is true, then the question is no longer what electrons are doing. The question is what you are doing every time you look at the world. The young physicist could not sleep that night. The image of the changing pattern stayed in his mind. Wave were not observed. Particle when observed. It felt less like an experiment and more like a message. The next morning, he began to study the history behind what he had seen. The story went back to the year 1801. A man named Thomas Young stood in a dark room with a beam of light and two thin slits cut into his surface. At that time, scientists argued about one big question. Is light made of particles or waves? Young believed light was a wave. When he shined light through the two slits, he saw a pattern of bright and dark bands appear on a wall behind them. That pattern could only be explained if light moved like a wave, spreading out and overlapping with itself. It was a shocking discovery for its time. But later, science moved forward. New experiments suggested that light could also behave like tiny packets of energy, called photons. It was both wave and particle, depending on how it was tested. This was strange, but scientists accepted it. Then came the bigger surprise. In the 20th century, researchers decided to repeat Jung's experiment. This time, they did not use light, they used electrons. Electrons were known to be particles, solid and measurable, parts of atoms themselves. No one expected them to behave like waves. And yet, when electrons were fired, one at a time, through two slits, the same wave pattern appeared, even when the electrons were sent through individually, as if each single electron somehow passed through both slits at once, as if it interfered with itself. The physicist reading this felt a chill. How could one particle act like two? How could something choose a path only when forced to? Then he reached the most unsettling part. Scientists placed detectors at the slits to see which slit the electron passed through. The moment they tried to measure its path, the wave pattern disappeared. The electrons behaved like simple particles. Again, two lines on the screen. Clear, predictable, ordinary. It was not the presence of a human eye that changed things. Even automated detectors caused the shift, but that only made the mystery deeper. What counts as observation? Is it human awareness? Is it interaction? Is it the transfer of information? Or is it something about reality itself that changes when it is forced to reveal its state? Some scientists said the electron is described by a wave of possibilities before measurement. This wave contains all the paths it could take, but once measured, that wave collapses into a single outcome. One slit, one position, one result. This idea became one of the strangest truths in modern physics. Before measurement, reality exists as probabilities. After measurement, it becomes definite. The physicists closed the book slowly. If this is true, then at the smallest level, the universe is not made of solid objects alone. It is made of possibilities. Possibilities that only settle into facts when tested. He looked around his office, at the desk, the walls, the window. Everything felt solid, stable, real, but deep inside every atom, electrons were still following these strange quantum rules, wave and particle, potential and actual, unseen and seen. He felt a quiet question rising in his mind again. If reality changes form when measured, then what does it mean to measure something? And if the act of observation helps decide the outcome, then how much of the world is waiting, silently, for interaction? The double-slit experiment was no longer just a classroom example. It was a doorway into a deeper mystery, one that did not just ask what the universe is made of, but how it becomes what it is. The physicist sat quietly at his desk, staring at a blank page. One sentence echoed in his mind: before measurement, there are only possibilities. It sounded simple, but it changed everything. In classical physics, the world is clear and solid. A ball is either here or there. A door is either open or closed. Every object has one state at a time, but in the quantum world, things are different. Before an electron is measured, it does not have one clear position. It exists in what scientists call a superposition. That means it holds many possible states at once, not one path, but many paths, not one outcome, but a range of outcomes. It is not that we do not know where it is, it is that it truly has not chosen yet. The physicists paused at that thought, has not chosen yet. It was as if reality at its smallest level remains open, unfinished, waiting. He imagined the electron moving toward the two slits, not as a tiny marble, but as a cloud of possibility, a spread of potential paths, until something forces it to settle, until something asks it a question. Which slit did you pass through? And in answering that question, the cloud collapses. The many become one, the possible becomes real. He leaned back in his chair. If this is true for particles, what does it mean for the larger world? He thought about simple choices in daily life, turning left or right at a street, saying yes or no to an opportunity, meeting one person instead of another. Each moment seems small, but before the choice is made, many paths exist, many futures are possible. Once the choice is made, one path becomes real, the others fade away. It felt strangely similar to what happens in the experiment. Before measurement, many outcomes exist. After measurement, only one remains. Of course, human decisions are not the same as electrons. The physicist knew that, but the pattern felt familiar. Possibility, then collapse. He walked to the window and looked outside. Cars moved along the road. People crossed the street. Clouds drifted slowly across the sky. Part 6. The shift. The laboratory was quiet again. The same machine stood in the center of the room. The same 2 slits. The same glowing screen. Electrons continued to fire one by one. Wave were not measured. Particle when measured. Nothing about. The experiment had changed, and yet everything felt different. The physicist no longer looked at the screen with confusion alone. Now he looked at it with recognition. The universe at its deepest level was not a frozen structure. It was responsive, not chaotic, not controlled by human thoughts, but shaped through interaction. Before measurement, there were many possible paths. After measurement, there was one actual result. Possibility became reality through participation. He realized something simple but powerful. The experiment was not just teaching physics. It was teaching perspective. For years, he had believed the world was something happening in front of him, a fixed stage where events played out. He was the audience, but quantum theory suggested something more subtle. The observer is never fully separate from the system. To observe is to interact. To interact is to influence, not in an unlimited way, not with total control, but enough to matter. He thought about the word creator. It once sounded dramatic, almost unrealistic, but now it felt quieter, more grounded. To create does not mean to command the universe. It means to take part in how possibilities unfold. Every decision narrows futures. Every action selects one path from many, even in small ways. Life responds. A conversation changes a relationship. A risk changes a career. A moment of courage changes direction. At each step, there were always multiple outcomes waiting. And through action, one becomes real. The physicist turned off the machine and stood in silence. He understood now that the greatest misunderstanding was not about particles. It was about people. Most people believe they are trapped inside a finished world. They see limits and assume the story is already written. But the quantum world whispers something different. At the foundation of reality lies openness. Not everything is decided in advance. Possibility exists until interaction shapes it. He walked toward the door of the lab, and for a moment, he paused. Outside that door were countless choices, countless possible conversations, countless possible futures. He could go home and forget these thoughts, or he could live differently because of them. Both possibilities existed, but only one would become real. He reached for the handle. In that small movement, the idea became clear. The shift from observer to creator is not loud. It is not dramatic. It happens the moment a person understands they are part of the process, not outside it. The universe is not something you stand apart from. You are woven into it, built from the same particles that refuse to choose a state until engaged, the same probabilities that become solid through interaction, the same mystery that turns waves into particles when measured. The truth about the observer effect may not be that the mind controls reality, but that reality is relational. It becomes definite through participation. And so does life. The physicist stepped into the hallway, the experiment still running in his thoughts, and for the first time, he no longer felt like someone watching the universe from the outside. He felt like a quiet but essential part of how it unfolds, and maybe that is the real transformation. Not discovering that you control everything, but realizing you were never just an observer to begin with. Each small act had shaped his experience, not by breaking the laws of nature, but by working within them. The universe is not a finished painting hanging on a wall. It is more like a process unfolding in real time. Every interaction adds detail. Every decision sharpens one line and erases another. Daniel turned off the detectors once more and watched the wave pattern return. He smiled slightly. The experiment that once unsettled him now felt like a mirror. It reflected a simple truth. Possibility exists. Interaction defines it. Participation gives it direction. As he powered down the machine and the screen faded to black, one final thought settled in his mind. You are not just a spectator in reality. You are part of the web that shapes it. The moment you understand that, your attention, your choices, and your actions narrow possibilities into lived experience. Is the moment you stop seeing yourself as a passive observer and begin to see that you have always been participating in creation.